Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has always been seen as a game with a ton of character diversity in its tournament meta. Since the beginning, whether looking at a top 8 of a local or top 64 to Super Major, the characters showcased were of wide variety. Smash Ultimate, however, is almost 7 years old, and the meta has shifted dramatically from the game's initial release, some finding the top cut of events being crowded up by the current meta's top tiers. But what did things used to look like? Before Fighters Pass 2, before characters with crazy advantage states were on top, what did year 1 of Ultimate look like? Which characters did the best? How well do these characters do now in 2025? Is 2025's meta really less diverse than 2019? Let's get into it. If we're going to look into the results of PGRU tournaments and try to showcase a meta game, some definitions need to be established. Firstly, what is the cutoff and what is seen as meta and viable? Our results are coming from the PGRU season, so we'll be utilizing the tiers already established to break down results. Secondly, how do we classify a player who has used multiple characters in a tournament run? The rule being applied is as long as the player was able to win a single game with a character, then the character shall be counted for a result. And if a player pulls out a character in a set but does not win a single game with the character, then the character is not counted. Also consider that character data is dependent on data recording from tournament and event runners and may be incomplete. Let's start with the first season of competitive Ultimate. The image shown right now showcases what I'm going to call characters' placement percentages. The placement percentage signifies the number of times out of 100 that character has successfully played in all of the PGRU Spring 2019 season, based on the rules laid down earlier. Palutena went from a pretty underwhelming Ember in Smash 4 to a bright goddess of light in Ultimate. She gained mobility, a strong initial combo game, and became a jack of all trades. Her overall simplistic game plan was easy to implement in these early days, especially when the majority of characters early on did not have crazy specialized mechanics like DLCs introduced later on. Even though she was simple, she was highly effective, garnering usage by many whether as a main or an easy secondary to cover bad matchups. Next up is Snake, one of the most versatile zoners in all of Ultimate. Snake's high damage, high kill power, and overall high survivability made him an incredibly tough opponent to deal with during the first season. With some buffs from engine changes between Brawl and Ultimate, for example directional air dodges, Snake was able to carry over his top tier status. Then there was Wolf, another character who skipped out on Smash 4. But Wolf was almost immediately recognized as an incredibly strong pick in early meta for similar simplistic reasons to Palutena. This was essentially how a decent amount of early meta picks were revolved around, with other straightforward but strong characters in the top 10 such as Inkling, Lucina, and Fox. It's either that, or characters that made their opponents explode in disadvantage such as Peach's turn-up combo potential and pre-nerf kill power, Pichu's crazy glass cannon trade-offs, and Olimar's Pikmin latches and up smash combos. But what about the meta diversity? Well, as you can see, of the 72 characters in the game through PGR version 1, 30 accounted for at least 1% of results, combining to make up 81.15% of all placements. This is surprisingly the least diverse Smash Ultimate's meta will ever be through its lifespan, or, at least up to 2025. Who knows, it could still go downhill from here. Even though Palutena was number 1 for the first season, she did not dominate the number 1 spot for the whole season. It was not even until May that she had the highest placement percentage, and she was outplaced by Snake and Wolf for prior months. Other top 10 threats such as Wolf, Pichu, and Fox were mostly inconsistent. You'll probably notice though that within the last month of the season of the top 10, Pichu drops below 1%, reflecting the nerfs Pichu received, heavily reducing the power of his previously devastating forward tilt and turning him into an even more brittle glass cannon through increases to his self-damage when using electric attacks, making the character feel unreliable to players who've used him the months prior. Snake, Mega Man, and Peach, despite nerfs to the latter two, wound up as the most consistent members of the top 10. Even after the first month, Snake never even fell out of the top 3. But this was the nature of the game at the time. Patches could swing your character in any trajectory, and it came down to whatever Nintendo felt like doing sometimes. As mentioned previously, the PGR season has multiple tiers for tournaments. You break down each category and see the placement percentages for each, as well as highest placements. You do uncover some interesting correlations. For example, the top 10 placement percentages of S tiers and the top 10 for the entire season are made up of the same characters, but the characters are in different order, with Peach sitting at number 1. But all C tiers put together actually contributed the highest amount of results this season, even though we only counted the top 8 placements. Another odd correlation regarding C tiers, we see 2 characters who do not show up in any other tier's top 10 with Roy and Ness. Roy is the most interesting here due to being number 11 in total placement percentage amount, but Roy didn't break top 20 in any other individual tier in terms of percentage, showcasing he was more of a regional menace and that some characters' results are not really consistent when comparing tiers. Palutena is a great example of this, as her number 1 overall for the season was mainly due to her dominant presence in C tier events due to their abundance. In terms of actually winning events, only 4 of the top 10 actually won a major, with Ike, Wario, and the first Fighter Pass character Joker each claiming a title as well. Some of the most represented characters just fell short, with some being meta more through the quantitative results rather than the qualitative. The last part I want to show you for this season is a correlation between a character's placement percentage and the amount of players who have contributed to the character's results. The blue diagonal line showcases the scattered plot's average linear growth, and in the bottom left are characters who make up less than 1% of results. Characters above the line are characters who had a diverse range of players bringing in results, while characters under the line had fewer players than average who gathered the majority of the results for said character. Wolf breaks far from the average, having an incredibly large number of different players who contributed results, as either a main or secondary, having more than a 10 plus difference than the second highest Palutena. Surprisingly, Palutena is on par with what would be an average sized player base despite having the largest placement percent. Joker's another character who had a large player base compared to the average, which may have been due to the hype around being a DLC character at the time. On the other side, Snake, Peach, and especially Olimar have much smaller player bases, at least here at the high level, than would be expected from their placements. Olimar in particular barely features more than 10 different players, but those players contributed enough to make Olimar a top 10 character for the season. As PGRU Spring 2019 ended, patches were in place, multiple DLC characters were on the horizon, and players were getting more and more comfortable with the game, with them starting to cement their choice of characters as the meta stabilizes. And PGRU Fall 2019's meta for Ultimate ended up shifting a ton in comparison to the game's early days. I just want to take a quick moment to ask you to subscribe. I'm very close to hitting 10k and I'd really like to do it soon, so if you've seen a few of my videos already, if you think my content's worth it to keep up with, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. PGRU's second season had some pretty big shifts in both tournament tiers and character metas. One of the most important changes we see is how many results were gathered in each tier. We had more tournaments and results to count than the previous season, but we also saw A tiers and B tiers gain much more prominence in our countings. In terms of characters, Joker, Diddy Kong, and Ken had the overall biggest improvement. Diddy Kong and Ken may have seen more play due to various buffs they received, making them more appealing threats in the meta. Joker, on the other hand, had a massive explosion of results after PGRU version 1 ended, finally having a full season to showcase why he was one of the best choices in this game, potentially influenced from MKLeo's success with the character the prior season. The biggest overall losses go to Pichu, Ike, and Mega Man. As mentioned earlier, Pichu was hit the hardest due to being nerfed back in June, and Ike just did not see much play at all this season, as his very basic game plan just didn't have the layers stronger characters would develop. He had barely any results from his biggest contributors from last season, and seemed to have dropped off in popularity altogether. One very interesting thing to note here is the characters showcased losing the largest percentages. Of the 10 characters to suffer the biggest drops, 9 were previously in the top 11. This means that the top placement percentage holders of last season were actually hit the hardest in overall results, even if their overall ranking across the cast may not showcase that. When looking at the total percentages of the whole season, we will see some pretty major changes. First up, the top 10 has shifted quite a bit. Wolf and Palutena switched spots, with Wolf claiming number 1 slot, and Snake, Peach, and Lucina remain top 10 despite all of them dropping a few spots. But some new additions claimed their stake at the top of the metagame. As mentioned earlier, Joker exploded in results and was arguably the strongest character in the game. Just a side note, if you add on the PGRU 2020 events, the ones that, they're not real full season because of the pandemic, Joker actually goes past Wolf for number 1. So yeah, he was definitely the best character in the game at this point. Jumping all the way to 5th was Pokemon Trainer. His unique 3 characters in one premise attracted quite a few players to try him out, with players such as Tweak, Moxie, Hikaru, and Leffen all putting up notable results with the character. Also joining the top 10 was Mario, That Rob That I Hate, and Zero Suit Samus. When looking at the overall metagame, Ike was actually the only character to fall out of 1% between seasons, but so many new ones launched above that threshold. Diddy Kong, Ken, Toon Link, Captain Falcon, Link, Luigi, Falco, Samus, and Rosalina all gaining more traction than the previous season. Plus, DLC characters this season such as Banjo and Hero all shaking up this entire metagame. With 40 out of the 76 characters managing this high of percentage, this might just be the most diverse Ultimates metagame will ever be. We'll ignore the 3 characters having 0 results. But what about the actual peaks of these characters? As showcased earlier, when we are comparing PGRU Fall to PGRU Spring, each tier's amount of results for the season are much closer in numbers. We see here that Wolf and Joker were the most dominant in results for all 4 tiers, but interestingly enough, Joker is the only character that has received a first placement in all 4 said tiers, won by players like MKLeo, Aaron, and Stroder. Wolf, on the other hand, has only taken first at a B tier, not really able to match Joker's accolades and why he wasn't really considered the number 1 best pick at the time. Other characters had little spikes in certain tiers. Pokemon Trainer was especially strong in S tiers, Olimar was surprisingly prominent in S tiers as well, even after suffering from nerfs. Zero Suit Samus excelled in A tiers, mainly due to her prominence in Japan's meta, where their biggest tournaments at the time were mainly A tiers, and Inkling also showcased a lot of success in A tiers, even though she as a character has dropped off quite a bit. Greninja was kind of a bit surprising this season, showcasing a lot of success in C tiers, similar to Roy in the last. Greninja has a solid presence in Europe, which had a healthy amount of C tiers this season, and could have been a reason why he was so prominent in this sector. When looking at the very top, 11 characters find major wins this season, with 7 achieving the biggest peak a character can get for the first time. So, with this example of looking at what the metagame looks like in this early time, and who exactly excelled during this time frame, let's now come back to current day and see how they're doing now. We're mainly going to be comparing the characters who made top 10 in both seasons and how well they do now that the meta is far more established, patches are done, and all DLC characters are available. And we'll be comparing to the 2025 Lumi Rank season up to Kulan 16. Let's start with Palutena. She fell out of the top 10 for the first time in the 2024.2 season, but is back in there in 2025. She's still a pretty popular pick in the metagame, and still pulls in strong tournament results under players such as Reflow and Louis Money, but she has not won a major since 2019. Coming close with a few sparse second placements, but still falling short. Snake has remained a consistent top 10 in the overall meta, but is arguably having one of his strongest seasons to date. He currently resides at number 6 in 2025 for placement percentages, is currently ranked number 3 on the official tier list, and has gotten multiple major wins under Hurt from Japan, who is in contention to be the number 1 player in the world. Snake has aged the best compared to any character from the early metagame, and stands as one of the biggest threats in Ultimate. Wolf has seen a bit of a downswing since the end of 2023, falling out of the top 10 in 2024 as more and more players lost faith in the character. He was ranked as the worst spacey on the official tier list in 2025, and has floated around in the top 20 for the past year and a half in placement percentages. But that doesn't mean the character is bad. In fact, we've seen a bit of a Wolf resurgence in 2025, with Canadian player Ouch making multiple top 8s and beating some of the best in the game, plus Masha in Japan winning a major with Wolf, giving him his first official major win ever. The character's baseline is still strong, and he can still compete in today's metagame. Joker has been another consistent top 10 character in placement percentages until 2025. For the first time since fall 2019, Joker currently sits outside the top 10. He's still mainly piloted by MK Leo and has a few shooters who made top 8 such as Goryoka and Tsubaki in Japan, but is struggling to find the same success he has prior, and is a long way from his dominant number 1 Slayer he used to be seen as. He's just fallen from her top 10 status for quite some time, but is still a pretty strong threat in the game. Players such as Umeki and Mude still rep the character proudly, but she's struggling a bit in today's landscape of characters, with her players having great peaks but struggling with inconsistency. Currently just making the top 30 in percentage, she sits at the lowest she has ever been ranked in the season's meta. Inkling is the first character in this list that has essentially stopped existing. Well, not entirely. Shiryuki in Japan still has brought the character to top 8s, but outside of that, she is struggling, dropping from a top 10 candidate to barely breaching into the top 50 the past 3 seasons in a row. Inkling at this point is a character who has been outclassed by overall power level of DLCs and buffs characters have gotten, and will likely remain down here for the remaining of the game's lifespan. Pokemon Trainer is an interesting one. He's definitely nowhere near how strong he once was in the metagame, but he's been sifting around will he be relevant, won't he be relevant for the past 3 years. And it's still just above the 1% threshold in 2025. There is one strong solo PT player still with Quid, who just is not very active to begin with, and unfortunately there just still isn't a definitive answer to that question of this are we actually relevant limbo that the character's been stuck in for years. Only time will really tell. Pichu of course fell off a cliff post-pandemic, as the character has not been seen as a worthy investment due to its inconsistent nature. But since 2023, Pichu has been on a gradual upward rise, and 2025 has made it all the way back to the 1% line, with notable players such as Naderyu, Dryby, and especially Yone P pushing the pack, with Yone P getting a silver medal at a major this year. Going to club these next few together as they're all the same. Mario, Fox, and Olmar have been top 20 staples in the meta percentages for years now, and are still pretty relevant forces with top players such as Snow, Light, and Shuton piloting the characters. Rob is Rob, he's one of the most popular and best characters in the game since the return of Offline Smash in 2022, and Lucina, Zero Suit Samus, and Mega Man have all stumbled below 1% for quite some time, struggling to find their place in the metagame that has moved far past their gameplay styles, not even making the top 50 in current year. These characters are not bad, by the way, and players have been ranked in the top 50 with these reps for the past season, but their place in the metagame has essentially been filled by characters who do what they want to do, just better. So, that covers the beginning meta of Ultimate. This video was actually a repurposing of my first articles I wrote for PG Stats, but unfortunately the site has recently went down, and I wanted to make sure my work for those early seasons were memorialized in some way. If you're interested in seeing more of those articles regarding the meta reinterpreted into a video, let me know in the comments down below. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.